How's it going?
It's going great, Mark. Thanks. How about yourself?
Going very well. Going very well.
Good.
Mike, I'm so glad we have you on today. One of the things that you've done is accountsrecovery.net. You have this newsletter, and it is one of the best newsletters I've ever read in the collection space or outside of it. And I'm curious, could you tell us a little bit about how you came up with it and how you make sure you stay on top of the good stuff that's coming out every day?
Sure. Thanks. I appreciate the kind words. The Daily Digest, which is I think the newsletter you're referring to that I send out every morning, that got its start probably about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm a big fan of a sports blog out there called The Big Lead, and The Big Lead every morning at 8 o'clock puts out what they call the Roundup. Roundup is just a few links to the sort of important sports stories of the day. Some links to some sort of other sort of popular news or pop culture or interesting links, and then a couple of videos. And I was looking for something to kind of send out, and because there were some other ACA sends that out its roundup every morning. Inside Arm had its daily newsletter that it sent out, and I was looking for something to send out, but just sort of over and above what was out there already. So, I looked at what the Big Lead was doing, and I go to it every morning. And every morning, is one of the things I do. So I took it. I took the idea and I applied it to what I was doing in the collection space and started sending it out. Originally it was just links to collections articles. And then I decided, you know what, why just link to somebody else when I can try and sort of get the traffic on my own and sort of try and digest things and maybe provide a little bit more of perspective. So I started writing the content started writing articles on my own based on what I was seeing and reading every morning, sort of the news of the day. And that's kind of where we are now. So every day I try and publish 4 or 5 articles in the morning, and then that is sort of the content that makes up the bulk of the Daily Digest every morning. And how do I stay on top of that? I can tell you I have 114 tabs every morning that I load up, that I search through between Google News alerts and attorneys general websites and circuit courts and appellate court decisions, and everything that I've just kind of every now and then I add another one. Usually I don't subtract any anymore, but I just kind of add new bookmarks every now and then when I see something that might be of interest. And, I just sort of go through that every day, and I try and find 3 or 4 things that I think might be of interest and relevance to my audience.
Wow. 4 articles every day, 114 tabs. How do you decide what you think is a worthwhile trend to be following and sharing with your audience, and how do you decide what might not make that standard?
Well, when we're looking at trends, as you know, data is, a great objective tool. So I've got 5 or 6 years now of data where I can look at what articles, what type of content are the ones that get the most traffic, the ones that people want to read, the ones that people do read every day, and that's where I sort of tend to steer my coverage. And that's always been for content, that's always been the compliance. People
Yeah.
want to know court cases, court rulings, settlements, things like that. So anytime you sort of see somebody outside of the industry write about a ruling, if it's Bloomberg or Reuters or something like that, then it's kind of important, definitely worth covering, just sort of over and above what I would find on my own. So you just kind of, I'd like to say that there's certainly some science to it, but after doing this for as many days as I've done it, I don't want to, it's going to sound self-serving, but you just kind of develop a sense for what you think is going to be interesting or not. So, you're scrolling through the news, you're scrolling through the alerts, you're scrolling through the sites, and your eyes sort of catches something, and then you read the article, and that's okay, that's going to be something like, for example, a state legislature introduces a new bill, or a new bill becomes a law, something you're going to want to write about. Court
Yeah.
case ruling, something you're going to want to write about. Collection agency expanding things like that, things you're going to want to write about. So I don't want to say there's a little bit of science and a little bit of art to it.
Sure, sure. It starts with that data analysis, and then after looking at the analysis again and again, you develop this intuition. Um,
Sure.
one of the things that I often say is that intuition is the original AI. It's that understanding of the patterns that you see around you and putting it together, and then just following whatever that pattern is pointed to.
I mean,
For,
absolutely. Like I did 130 something webinars last year. So you can kind of also, it also sort of applies there. You can see which ones people register for and which ones don't. Like I've been doing the webinars for a number of years now. And despite how important I think they are, I've learned people don't care about data breaches. You want to write
huh,
cybersecurity data, do a webinar about cybersecurity or data breaches. It's not going to get a ton of people to register. And I don't know whether it's people just don't think it's not going to apply to them or it's ever going to happen to them or what. But, it's just sort of like, a lesson that data has taught me. Doesn't mean I'm going
right.
to stop doing that, but I do know now going in when I do one, not to expect a huge turnout.
Got it. So then let's talk about the hottest topics in the collection space. When you look at, the data that you have from your newsletter and from webinar attendance, if you could boil it down to maybe the one, two, or three things that you notice folks are interested in right now, what do you think those things are?
Sure. I mean, obviously, the debt collection rule from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is certainly a big thing right now. Since it came out in October, people are sort of trying to wrap their head around what they have to do, what they can do, what they can't do, whether they should do it now, whether they should wait. So that's obviously something that's gotten a lot of attention, and I think rightfully so. What's going to happen when President-elect Biden comes into office next week or on January 20th, and how that's going to impact the arm industry for better or worse is also something I think that a lot of people are concerned about. Is it going to mean changes at the CFPB? And if that's so, is there going to be changes to the debt collection rules? So there's a whole sort of series of dominoes that could fall depending on how things go once the new president takes office. So I think those are sort of two of the two important areas, sort of operationally in compliance. And the other thing that you're looking at that I'm trying to push is that there is an evolution going on of technology in this industry that I think a lot of people are paying attention to, but maybe not enough people are paying attention to or focused on. I can remember doing a webinar a few months ago, and I had an agency owner who said, we're not collection companies anymore, we're technology companies.
Hmm.
And that's the new mindset that I think people have, and that technology is a huge differentiator. It allows them to be, agencies to be more efficient. It allows them to be more productive. It allows them to recover more. And I think some people are slowly catching on, definitely at the front end of that. But I do think that, this industry still needs to kind of push forward with its, interest and adoption of technology.
Right. And I'm curious, do you think that the CFPB is driving that and people are adopting technology because they're trying to adapt to the new rules? Do you think that consumer trends are responsible for that push of technology? Or is there, some economic force in the collection space right now that is pushing people toward pushing agencies toward using technology to improve their collections, whereas previously, it might have been, securing more placements from their network or something like that.
Sure. I definitely think it's more the first two. Certainly, the debt collection rule from the CFPB has created guardrails for the industry that sort of when it comes to things like text messaging and email, that they know what they can and can't do now, which is something they haven't had before. They've had to rely on sort of court case rulings or things like that, or other enforcement actions, sort of figure out what is and isn't allowed. I definitely think that's part of it. I do think that consumers are driving this. Consumers, the data is there, but which communication channels consumers prefer. And every time you talk to someone, nobody answers the phone anymore. So I think that's driving it. And then I also think that there's a dynamic where the creditor clients are starting to sort of push the
Hmm.
technology because they're using the technology with the consumers. And these collection agencies are intended to be sort of an extension of their brand, that creditor's brand. So I think that they also want to sort of be able to make sure that consumers can continue to communicate with that collection agency collecting on behalf of that creditor in the same way they can talk to the creditor.
Right, right. So there's the push from the CFPB, there's the change in consumer preferences, and then there's also the pull from the client side about how they know their consumers want to be interacted with, and the sort of way they want to portray themselves. Could you give a little bit of background on the recent CFPB ruling and what you think that might mean for the collection space next year?
Sure. The CFPB came out with two parts of its debt collection rule. The first one was in October. The second one was in December. The first part largely, or not largely, but the first part covered a number of different areas. Of most importance to the industry was the use of text messaging, the use of email in collecting. It also provided something that it's calling a limited content message, which is a voicemail that can be left on consumers' phones, where it doesn't count as a communication under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. So you don't have to necessarily worry about violating that law when you're leaving a voicemail now. So that's something that a lot of agencies have been paying attention to. And then when it came out with the second part of the debt collection rule, it covered what's called time bar debt where the statute of limitations has expired, meaning the collector, the creditor is not able to sue, file a lawsuit to collect on that debt anymore. It also tackled something called debt parking, where a collector, creditor reports a negative item on an individual's credit report, but doesn't notify that individual right away. So they're going to do away with that. And then the final thing was what's called the model validation notice, which is a template letter that can be sent out and can be used to try and limit the number of lawsuits that are filed against collection agencies for allegedly violating different aspects of the FDCPA when they send collection letters.
Right. So a survey that you recently released, Mike, where you surveyed different folks in the ARM industry
Mm-hmm.
and asked them what they thought about the rule and how well it supported the health industry, the health of the industry, and how well it didn't. What were folks reactions to the rule, and do you think that they're right?
Hmm. Uh, so the first part's the easy part to that question. Some interesting data that came out of the survey. It actually, allows me to sort of cover something I forgot to mention when I was talking about the rule, in that the rule establishes limits on the number of times a collector can attempt to communicate with an individual and the number of conversations it can have. What it calls call caps or call frequency limits, and that was by far the most popular response when the survey participants were asked what they were most concerned with was call
Mhm.
caps. It was nearly twice as popular a concern as disputes and requests for original creditor information and sending required disclosures. So definitely something that's keeping collection agency owners and executives up is how they're going to manage in a time when they're going to have to make far fewer calls to try and get in touch with people. When asked how much of a burden it's going to be to implement measures needed to comply, only 20% of the respondents said it was going to be a little bit of a burden. The other 80% said it was going to be some or a lot. So clearly they're thinking that there's going to be a fair amount of work that's going to have to go into it, which is a good thing they've got another 11 months to get it all done. And the other interesting data point was that I think just about 3/4 of the respondents think the rule is going to go into effect on November 30th as originally planned, but only 38% think that it's going to go into effect as is. So
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of people out there that think that the rule is going to be amended or changed during the time from now till it goes into effect November 30th, either through some new director at the CFPB or some other means.
Yeah. Yeah. one of the things I thought was so interesting is that before the ruling came out, folks were saying that they really wanted clarity from the PB. Things about texting, can you even do it?
Mhm.
And we had this. It was pretty clear that you can, as long as you do, as long as you offer an opt out. And I'm sure there's other pieces to it, but that you can. And then there was a question about how do you collect from deceased consumers. Well, they clarified that you can continue to work with the estate. So do you think that folks got the clarity that they wanted, and is clarity really what they wanted?
I do think clarity is what they wanted.
Yeah.
If you go back 4 or 5 years, the conversations that I was having with people in the industry, and the consensus was, you tell us what we can do, tell us what rule we have to follow, and we'll follow it, whatever it
Yeah.
is, hard, soft, easy, not easy. Just tell us what the rules are. And I think for a lot of these things, especially things like text messaging and email, where there hasn't really necessarily been clear rules. Now there has. Everybody jokes about the FDCPA, which was enacted in the late 1970s, and how it mentions telegrams, how it mentions collect phone calls and things like that. And it does. And that law hasn't been updated in the last 40 years, and desperately needed to. So I think now that there are some rules out there that, like I said, provide some sort of guardrails and some boundaries for collection agencies to know what they can and can't do. I think that's all they're looking for.
Yeah. How crazy is it that we've gone from telegrams to letters to phone calls now to text messages in such a short period of time in order to be collecting these balances?
I know it just makes you wonder what the next 5, 10, 15 years are. And that's something that, you know, we're trying, it's something I'm trying to help sort of, kind of pull that vision into focus a little bit, and talk to people in the industry about where it's going, instead of just sort of getting caught up on text messaging and
Right.
emails. Because really, like, how long have you and I been sending text messages, just generally, with our friends and family and whatever? It's been years, so the industry's finally kind of catching up to that. But what's next? So the next time that there's that next evolution in communication, whatever it is, that they're not 4 and 5 years behind that as well.
Where do you see things going in collections?
I knew that that's where the question was going to go.
I had to. I
and,
had to.
and I've been, trying to put my brain into overdrive to think of something. And, that I don't, to be honest, right now, I don't know. I do think that there is a lot of really interesting technology that's out there, that is just starting to kind of filter into the collection space. Certainly we've seen some things with machine learning, with artificial intelligence, with providing, information faster, with providing higher quality information, with looking at different types of data. I think that that's going to kind of continue to be refined, and to have more of an impact on how agencies operate. I don't necessarily, think that there's some new awesome communication tool that's on the horizon that's going to revolutionize how we talk. And I'm going to say that, and probably tomorrow morning it's going to be right there in the one of my
Hmm.
114 Google News alerts about how there's new communication. But I don't think that there's anything new right now on the horizon. But I do think that sort of continuing to sort of perfect what's out there now, and really kind of hone in, and instead of just sort of making as many calls as you can without considering being harassing, and sending as many letters as you can without considering that you're going to worried about being sued for harassing somebody. That's not going to work anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I think email doesn't cost anything, so you want email to sort of replace letters, and text messaging is cheaper. So I think there are efficiencies that can be gained, and I think that's where the industry is heading right now, more so than finding some new great tool to help to kind of get to get in touch, or to stay in touch with consumers.
Right, right. We might not be FaceTiming consumers in the near future. Um, but I also imagine that, their preferences will drive how agencies reach out to them. What are some of the consumer preferences that you're noticing, and how consumers want to be interacted with?
Well, the data is pretty clear. Consumers want to be interacted with in a way that they can sort of talk to somebody on their terms when it's convenient for them, using the channel that's most convenient for them. So, some people, personally, like, sort of just kind of start with a story. You know, I I've come to learn that people like to consume their media differently. Some people like to read, some people like to watch, some people like to listen. Some people like to do a sort of a mix of the three. So I try and deliver my content across as many of those channels as possible. So I'm not limiting myself by saying, I'm not doing videos. So people who want to watch aren't gonna try and read or listen. So I think the same is true. That sort of same dynamic is true for collection agencies, in that they want to be in as many channels as possible, because you don't know what a consumer is going to prefer. Some people are obviously going to prefer text. There are some who may prefer email. There are some who are going to prefer going to a website and having a chat with somebody, and there are some people who are going to want to talk on the phone. So I think for a collection agency has to be able to engage with consumers in across all those channels, and it's got to be, and this is sort of maybe where the industry is headed. It's got to be two-way. It can't just be, I'm going to send a consumer a text message and then expect the consumer to go to my website or send me an email or call me back. That whatever channel you want to engage, that consumer wants to engage with, the agency needs to be able to engage with that consumer in sort of a back and forth fashion. And that's definitely something that agencies are developing and building toward.
That that's so interesting. Do you think that means that, letters are going to be less useful, or being able to, auto pay on a website might be less useful because you're not able to create that dialogue? Or do you think that those mediums do have staying power?
I'm not, letters, I think, have some staying power. There are people who I think agencies who will prefer to send a letter, even though it costs more than sending an email, just because, it's sort of the way it's always been done.
Hmm.
The self-pay, I think everyone wants to drive people to a website to pay. Like, you'll get a collection letter, and it'll
Hmm.
include a QR code, or it'll include a link. Go to our website, and pay the balance. And some agencies are getting to that point now where you can go to a self-pay portal and negotiate. Maybe try and negotiate with
Hmm.
um, a payment plan, or a lower payment or something like that. That's also somewhere where I think the industry is headed. But I do think that the self pay is sort of the holy grail
Yeah.
for a collection agency, because if I can send a letter, a text message, a voicemail, an email, and get that consumer to pay without having to engage, without having to incur the expense of a phone call, the ideal has always been to try and resolve an account on the first call resolution. But the ideal is a zero call resolution.
Hmm.
If they don't have to engage in a call, then that's the ultimate goal, I think, that every agency is shooting for.
Right, right. A- And there is something kind of official about a letter. Like, you get a
Sure.
letter, that's where you get your credit card bill, that's where you
Yeah.
get your taxes. And when you get a letter, there's something particularly serious about it that I think, perks up attention. It's so easy for communications with consumers in general to get lost in all that
Mhm.
they have. And if you have to rip open the envelope and unfold the letter, and you see it and there's a big letterhead at the top, that gets your attention. That motivates action.
Sure. I mean, time was like 5 years ago. You looked at email like that. You didn't trust anything that came via email, and you trusted the mail. And now it's kind of seems like that dynamic is sort of shifting a little bit, where I get something in the mail, and you're right, it's something it's not garbage. It's something I've got to pay attention to because nobody sends sort of junk mail anymore. So if I do get something in my mailbox, then it's something I do have to open.
Yeah, it's funny. The U.S. Postal Service has this new service they offer, or maybe they've had it for a few months, maybe a year or so, where they actually send you a picture
Mm-hmm.
of the mail that's coming to you, and it's called like the U.S. Mail Preview or something like that. And can you imagine, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, even remotely caring to see a picture of the mail that's coming to you? Like that, I think that's because the mail is it's standing out because the few things you get are so much more important.
Sure, I completely agree. The amount of mail that personally I get in my mailbox every day is less, but the ones I do get, the ones I do get are ones that generally I have to open for some reason or another.
Now, what do you think changed in 2020? Do you think that, on the consumer side, um, that certain preferences changed from the pandemic and everyone, being at home or having to work during the pandemic, which is one of the hardest situations?
Mhm.
Do you think that the way that consumers wanted to interact with collections agencies changed, and if so, how?
I don't know that it necessarily changed. How I would characterize it was, I think maybe it accelerated
Hmm.
the changes that were happening. We were slowly starting to see more people um, want to communicate. People wanted to communicate via text messaging. I think you saw more agencies sort of roll that out in 2020 than you had in previous years because that dynamic was changing and because so many consumers were asking for it. So many consumers. I think that was the dynamic at play, was that agencies were responding to those changes faster than they maybe have had in previous years.
Hmm. And the CFPB rule makes that more difficult now because you have to space out the calls within 7 days.
Well, that's the interesting. That's part one. The CFPB came out with its rule, which has the call caps in it. And then in December, you had the Federal Communications Commission come out with an order that changed the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, where now collection agencies are capped on how many times they can call a landline phone
Hmm.
if they don't have consent. And that is never something that they've had to worry about before. So there's another wrinkle that goes into sort of the calling strategy that agencies are going to have when that order goes into effect in June as well. And I think it's something that caught a lot of people in the industry by surprise, even though the FCC had it out for comment and went through the entire rulemaking process. I don't think anybody really thought they were going to do anything like this. So it did catch some people off guard when they put it out between Christmas and New Year's. But I do think that, again, it's going to make the other channels more important, and it's going to make the getting a resolution on the phone. Every time you are on the phone with somebody now, it raises the stakes for that phone call to be a successful phone call. Whether you're negotiating a payment plan, whether you're getting a payment in full or something, it really kind of makes every phone call significantly more important.
Yes. So, Mike, one of the details I missed about the plan is, are you able to, talk to a consumer and agree to call them back the next day or agree to call them in 2 or 3 days, or is that off the table?
Yeah, as long as the consumer, as far as I recall, as long as the consumer asks to be called back. So if you call the consumer and the consumer says it's not a good time right now, can you call back tomorrow? You can call back tomorrow. But
Right.
if I recall correctly, if the consumer doesn't say something like that, then you can't.
Right. Yep. So one of the trends I think that we're seeing in the collection space in general is this movement toward almost consumer first collections or empathetic collections, and training communication skills and training negotiation skills. It seems like now the importance of that has skyrocketed. What is your data telling you about, are agencies focusing more on empathetic communications with consumers?
Absolutely. And I want to sort of make sure that, it's not to say that they weren't empathetic before, but I do think that agencies are starting to truly understand the success that that model has over, say, a more professional, or more, not want to say professional, but more, maybe slightly more aggressive type of conversation. But that, between the pandemic and between just sort of where the industry was already heading in terms of seeing that success, I think that, there has been a huge emphasis on empathetic collections, and on, negotiating, on sort of training negotiation skills for collectors, so that they have the tools that they can to make those calls more successful, which is something that I think that everybody wants, and that that's in the best interest for everybody.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to a customer in the debt settlement space the other
Mm-hmm.
day, and what he was telling me is he said it's actually been an incredibly tough time for debt settlement. I said, really? I thought it would be, amazing. And he said, well, the problem is that, consumers, feel like they have much more of a choice about, when to pay the debt and if to pay the debt because of the different, leniencies that they're getting from
Sure.
the pandemic and legislation. So of course there's good to that, and there's also challenges to that. Do you think that we'll see a change in the consumer mentality in 2021?
That's a good question. I haven't seen it yet. Certainly, there have been restrictions on certain collection activities, filing lawsuits, things like that, where were either put on hold, or were had other restrictions put in place, and some still do have some in place in certain states. So it's kind of sort of a patchwork at this point. But I'm not sure, I'm not sure that we'll see a dramatic change in 2021 from what we saw at, what the pandemic started last year. I do think we'll just sort of see a continuation of that. And that will probably, for as long as we're sort of in the situation we're in, and until things kind of get back to whatever, however close to normal they're going to get, I think that's the way things are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mike, one more question for you here. The What do you think the debt collection agency of 2030 will look like?
What do I think the debt collection industry agency of 2030 is going to look like? Um, I think it's going to look a lot smaller than it does now. I don't think that there probably will be as many collectors actually in an agency, or working for an agency, as there are now. I think technology is going to really kind of change a lot of that. But I do think that while maybe there will be fewer collectors, I think the IT sides of these companies are going to really have to grow. So agencies where they don't really have a head of IT, or a CTO, or anything like that, where it's sort of like the CEO who's wearing multiple hats, or things like that. I think that's going to have to change. I think you're going to see more data scientists, more analysis, analysts, more analysis being done. I think you're going to see more programmers 10 years from now than you see now.
Wow. Wow. Mike, thank you so much. If folks want to learn more about your work or connect with you, how can they find you?
Accountsrecovery.net is the website where all that content that we were talking about at the start of this conversation can be found. All the content's there, all the videos are there. There's a pop-up that shows up when you come to the site to sign up to get all that email we were talking about. So that's the best place to get access to everything that I'm publishing.
Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Mark, my pleasure. Thank you.
See ya.